It's 1981, and to most Australians, the cops are the good guys, keeping the streets clean and our families safe. But in the nation's biggest police force, truth was stranger than fiction. It was like the plot of a bad Hollywood movie. Police so corrupt that they become leading drug suppliers. Officers in the hold-up squad who organise armed robberies and even murders. And behind it all, one of the nation's most celebrated officers, proven to be a terrorising criminal. You look like... But who was Sallie Anne Huckstepp? Born into a middle-class Jewish family in Sydney's affluent eastern suburbs, she attended a private school, Moriah College, and was considered a bright student. But she struggled with her parents' early divorce. And at 13, she ran away from home. At just 14, she was working as a waitress at Sydney's notorious King's Cross club Whiskey A Go-Go. And at 15, she turned to prostitution to pay for a growing drug habit, an addiction she desperately tried to break.
The reasons for young girls to start selling their bodies and shooting heavy drugs in places like this are varied. Sallie Anne's reason was almost too bad to be true. She says her boyfriend asked her to become a prostitute when she was 16. He was a thief and a heroin addict, and he needed the money. She went firstly to a brothel in Kalgoorlie, Western Australia. Kalgoorlie brothels are remnants of a past era. The girls actually live in the brothels and are restricted in their movements about the town by a set of unwritten rules. Quite a place for a young teenager to start a career.
Coming back here after 10 years is really hard. I forget the faces and the names and the fan. I've never forgotten the fan. If you're a hooker, you've got to be very careful of disease. I mean, because it puts you out of business and you don't make any money. So clients used to come in and you'd put your light on and throw them under the light and check them for VD and assorted ailments. And this was the second most important place in the room. It's very hard to come back and face the beginning of all the bad times. Coming back here stirs up so many mixed emotions in me. So I realised that I got my first taste of stability. I mean, I felt really stable here. I had this terrible realisation to think that you found stability in a whorehouse. I was so young. I was 17, you don't know anything about anything.
By the time Sallie Anne turned 20, she'd amassed dozens of convictions for prostitution and paid out thousands of dollars in bribes to corrupt cops. Then, in early 1981, she fell for a heroin dealer and standover man named Warren Lanfranchi, a man who would change her life, a man who would indirectly lead her to her death.
They met through her prostitution. The first thing he did was send her red roses. And look, he was the one, for all his faults, of which there were many. He got her off heroin, he cleaned her up. He was planning for them to amass enough money to get some false passports, to go and live overseas and to start afresh.
It sounds unbelievable, but it's real and it's happening.
In 1981, Sallie Anne would give an exclusive television interview that would eventually trigger the biggest clean-out of crooked cops in Australian police history. But large parts of her tell-all story have never been seen, kept in a vault until now. For legal reasons, only a fraction of Sallie Anne's interview was aired. The full 16mm film would be locked away and forgotten for 4 decades. But her first-hand account of a police force gone rogue and the doubt she cast on a hero police officer who was in truth a drug lord and brutal murderer was electrifying.
I remember going up there to the 22nd floor or so of the Hilton Hotel, and she was quite emotional that night. She was crying beforehand about what had happened to Lanfranchi, not about talking to us, but what had happened. She was chain smoking beforehand, and yet she was clearly tough. My memory was how articulate and how together she was for a 25 or 26-year-old woman who'd been to hell and back. And she wanted to tell the story, and she also wanted to get Roger Rogerson. And so I sat there as a journalist, almost with my mouth open.
We couldn't get to talk to Roger Rogerson. The critical factor in this story, the critical person, was Sallie Anne Huckstepp. But how do you get her on camera at that stage? Sally, as we discovered, was keen to talk, keen to blow the whistle on Roger Rogerson. But it was a matter how she did it and how she did it and kept alive. I mean, she really feared for her life.
They're extraordinary charges. I mean, for most Australians, this is the stuff of fiction. It's something that happens in Hollywood or with the mafia.
When Sallie Anne's interview broadcast on Sunday, the 5th of July, 1981, much of it was considered too defamatory to air. But shortly afterwards, she repeated her claims to police internal affairs.
A detective squad in Sydney arranges hold-ups.
That's right. And the drug squad sells heroin. I know there are people watching this who are just not going to believe this.
And in broad daylight, on a Saturday afternoon, a detective sergeant executes a man. That's what you're saying.
That's right. He'd murdered him in broad daylight and thought that he could get away with it, as he's probably got away with it before.
That's not the way Australians read it on Sunday morning in the newspapers.
Unfortunately, a lot of what Australians read in the newspapers is what the police allow them to read.
She spoke to us for 60 minutes, and then it hit the fan the next day on the Monday. And suddenly the police, newspapers were on the story, and the police wanted to know more details because she had fingered Rogerson and the police running the drug business in New South Wales. There'd been stories in my early journalism career of the police commissioner clearly being crooked in New South Wales. There'd been stories of the Premier of New South Wales having been on the take from various gambling syndicates and so on. So I wasn't exactly naive. But to get a chapter and verse from this woman who had been in the thick of things, if you like, was pretty shocking, even for me. She'd talk so easily and so openly about the police knocking people off, about the police being in charge of the heroin trade.
Detective Rogerson from the Armed Hold-Up Squad.
Sorry?
Detective Rogerson from the Armed Hold-Up Squad.
What was Warren's reaction when he found that?
Fear.
Why?
Detective Rogerson has a reputation as being a very evil man. He's thought by... There are a lot of criminals in Sydney who are, you know, people who don't frighten easily, who are really frightened of Detective Rogerson.
Had Warren had dealings with Detective Rogerson before?
Not as far as I know, no. Well, he knew Sergeant Rogerson was involved in armed robberies. He knew that Detective Rogerson supplied drugs. Well, it was a large heroin deal, that he supplied heroin to Parramatta Jail.
He supplied heroin to Parramatta Jail.
That's right. Seems pretty incredible, doesn't it?
But you know, anyone watching this would say, right, here's a man whom society might well call a thug, for want of a better word, pointing a finger at a member of the police force, saying that he's a major dealer in heroin, saying that he supplies Parramatta Jail with heroin. Why should anyone believe Warren?
Because Warren was murdered by Sergeant Rogerson, Detective Rogerson, under extremely suspicious circumstances. I mean, I don't have any hard, cold proof. But surely, you know, that's something that's got to be done.
Let's come to that in a moment. Let's backtrack a little bit. So he hears that the man involved, the man he's ripped off, is this policeman. And he's frightened. What happens then?
Terrifying.
Terrified. What happens then? Does he run?
We went into hiding. Look, Warren thought that Detective Rogerson was going to kill him.
Why did he think that?
Because $37,000 is a lot of money.
Was he
to
told?
Anybody.
Was he told that?
Oh, of course. I mean, we got messages. We got a message from Parramatta Jail that Rogerson was going to kill him. Not only from Parramatta Jail, we got messages from different people in the criminal world. He let it be known.
And you obviously believe those if you shifted from house to house.
Of course.
So what happened then? What's the next step?
Well, we knew that Detective Rogerson might possibly do business with us. First of all, we see a report in the paper that Warren's wanted for questioning for the attempted murder of a policeman, which Warren didn't do, and several supposed bank robberies. That's when we really got worried.
What are you saying? That you thought you were being set up?
That's right. We knew we were being set up. I mean, it was clearly obvious. Warren didn't need to do bank robberies. The heroin business is a very lucrative thing.
Why couldn't Warren simply say, I've made a terrible mistake, here's the $37,000 back?
Because we were terrified. Detective Rogerson has a reputation as being a killer. In fact, Warren was so terrified, he went and bought himself a gun and used to sleep with it next to the bed because we were terrified that Rogerson was going to find out where we were and come in and kill us both in our bed.
Had Warren carried a gun before?
Never. Never to my knowledge. I never saw Warren with a gun until that newspaper article where he was accused of attempting to murder a policeman.
So how did you feel on the Thursday before Warren was shot when word came back that a meeting had been arranged, that things could be worked out with the policeman?
Initially, we were really relieved. Warren particularly was relieved. We, through an intermediary who has done business with Rogerson before, we had him contact Rogerson and put it to him that we were prepared to pay him whatever he wanted to leave us alone. Initially, we were pretty pleased. You know, I mean, it's a terrible thing to think that the police are out to kill you.
Now, you weren't being overly dramatic in that. You weren't exaggerating the situation.
No, certainly not. I mean, as I said before, there are criminals in Sydney, heavy criminals, people who are not scared of anybody, accept Detective Rogerson.
So Thursday, Warren comes home. What's he saying?
You won't believe it. Rogerson's going to do business with us.
How much?
He wanted $30,000. At that stage, actually, Thursday night, we didn't know how much he wanted. All he'd said was he'd do business. It wasn't until Friday that Warren went out, saw the intermediaries, and Rogerson asked us for $30,000. He wanted $10,000 immediately. Then he was going to show Warren a robbery.
Show Warren a robbery. What does that mean?
Well, he was going to show Warren
How to carry out a robbery?
a robbery he could do with all the inside information.
The policeman was going to show Warren how to do a robbery.
That's right. He wanted, well, we didn't have the $30,000. In fact, we had to borrow most of the $10,000. The robbery was so that Warren could pay Rogerson the balance of the $30,000, plus he wanted a cut of the proceeds from the robbery.
What a percentage of the proceeds?
That's right.
Right. So what happened then? You learned that on Friday. On Saturday, a meeting's arranged?
On Saturday, a meeting's arranged at 10:30 in the morning. Warren's picked up at 10:30 in the morning by one of the intermediaries. He's taken to another intermediary, the guy who did direct business with Rogerson, who's spoken to him that morning, and a time and a place. Warren was then told a time and a place that he could meet him.
It would be Chippendale in a back lane.
No. Warren was originally told that Rogerson wanted to see him in a car park under a block of flats at Redfern. Now, by Saturday morning, Warren was starting to get a bit dubious about the whole situation. I mean, you know, we were really scared for our lives. And he would frisk Rogerson so that both of them could see that neither of them had a gun. They'd meet, talk. Warren would hand him the $10,000. He would tell him about the robbery.
The policeman would tell him about the robbery.
That's right. And also, apparently Rogerson wanted Warren to, after he'd done the robbery and got the money, Rogerson wanted the money left in the hands of a solicitor, and he wanted him to be charged with the attempted murder because they'd already got up in court and said they were looking for him. It was on record. The agreement was that Warren goes to jail for 2 weeks so that it doesn't look suspicious. He gets out on bail after 2 weeks. The case goes on for, 10 months, 18 months, and then it's dismissed for lack of evidence.
Now, the attempted murder was the robbery, let's get the details on it, the robbery that had been reported in the newspaper, at which time it was reported that they were also looking for Warren. Right, okay.
Right.
All right. What did you think at this stage? I mean, here's, you've been scared for 4 or 5 weeks, terrified, your words. Suddenly, there's a deal arranged. Did it ring true?
No, I was terrified. I couldn't understand why Rogerson would take $30,000 when we'd already taken $37,000 off him.
Did you say that to Warren?
Yes. But Warren felt that he could trust his friends, that Rogerson wouldn't have a gun. And also Warren said to me that Rogerson had never welched on a business deal before. Apparently, there were 2 policemen drinking in a hotel opposite that lane, besides Rogerson and one other policeman. They were drinking in the hotel. Someone drove past and saw Warren walking up the lane, lifting his jumper to show that he was unarmed. Detective Rogerson also lifted his jumper or opened his coat. I'm not really sure. I know that he apparently, was showing that he was supposedly also unarmed. Apparently, the 2 policemen in the hotel had just had a beer and ordered another one. As their beers arrived, they saw Warren, ran out of the hotel and fired at him, hurting him, frightening towards Rogerson, which is where Warren, so I've been told, ran, thinking that Rogerson was unarmed. There are witnesses who have signed affidavits to say there were more than 2 shots. Apparently, the last 2 shots, which killed Warren, were some time apart. Warren ran towards Detective Rogerson. Another detective jumped out from behind a derelict building, a roller door, and shot Warren in the chest. They picked his body up, took him round the corner, and that's when Detective Rogerson shot him in the head at close range.
Now, they're extremely grave charges, aren't they?
Extremely grave.
You've already said that Warren was terrified. He had been terrified from the moment he discovered what he was up against. Why couldn't he have gone down there spooked, frightened, taken a gun that you didn't know about, and aimed the gun at Detective Sergeant Rogerson, as is claimed, and been shot in the course of duty? Why couldn't that happen?
Warren took that money to pay Detective Rogerson.
But when he got there, he saw that there was more than one policeman.
No.
He thought that once again he was being set up.
He only saw Detective Rogerson. The other detectives were in the hotel, unseen to Warren. The detective who fired the first shot was hiding in a burnt-out building behind a roller door.
Why would Detective Sergeant Rogerson want to kill him at that stage if all he's going to get is $10,000 as against the $30,000 that he'd been promised?
I suppose as a warning.
It's a pretty solid warning.
It's the best kind of warning, I suppose. There'll be a lot of... He murdered Warren.
But
I
he's
don't
out.
suppose that anybody else will take the risk of doing what Warren did.
But he's already out $20,000 from Warren, and maybe more if he initially lost $37,000.
Well, I suppose if he hadn't murdered Warren, he could have been out a lot of more money. Through other people doing the same thing that Warren did, ripping off his dealers.
Was Warren jumpy when he left?
See, Warren knew too much. Warren knew too much about Detective Rogerson and his involvement in organised crime.
But you say he'd never spoken of him. You don't know whether Warren ever met him before.
Oh, Warren often spoke of Detective Rogerson.
Did he?
He often spoke about the amount of jewellery that Detective Rogerson wears and the lifestyle he leads and the fact that he supplies a lot of heroin to a lot of people. And that he arranges armed robberies.
And-
I know there are people watching this who are just not going to believe this.
And in broad daylight, on a Saturday afternoon, a detective sergeant executes a man. That's what you're saying.
That's right. He'd murdered him in broad daylight and thought that he could get away with it, as he's probably got away with it before.
You don't know that. You don't know of any other charges. It's only hearsay.
That's only hearsay.
And again, you weren't there. I mean, on this occasion, on the Saturday, last Saturday, you weren't there. It's simply what other people have told you. You believe that there are witnesses.
I know there are witnesses.
When were you told that he'd been killed?
Saturday night, about 8 o'clock. I sat at home, hoping against hope that he was going to come walking through the door, that everything had gone as planned and Mum was just out having a drink, celebrating, if you like. But
6 o'clock had come and gone, hadn't it?
well, come and go, long gone. And I was told that Warren had been murdered.
Now, you say murdered, I mean, you were told he'd been shot.
No, I was told that Warren had been murdered. And I knew that he'd been murdered.
That's not the way Australians read it on Sunday morning in the newspapers.
Unfortunately, a lot of what Australians read in the newspapers is what the police allow them to read. People find it very hard to conceive that upstanding, upright members of our police force are corrupt. They don't want to believe it. It doesn't make you feel very protected. And most people just can't conceive of it.
If what you say is right, and you were frightened before Warren was killed, you have every reason to be terrified right now.
I've been in hiding since Warren's death. I'm quite sure that the police would probably kill me.
And now, Sallie Anne was the hero. In the wake of the 60 Minutes interview, her life took a new direction, working as a journalist and even commissioned to write a book. But as the years passed and Sallie Anne drifted out of the public eye and the protection that comes with publicity, she was a marked woman. Her revelations about Rogerson and his criminal web carried an almost certain death sentence.
I knew Sallie Anne Huckstepp. She was attractive, sharp, vivacious, unreliable. And she had a terrible weakness for drugs, drama, and dangerous men. I'm Mike Willisey. In 1982, Sallie Anne told me that she believed she would be murdered. Less than 4 years later, police pulled her body from a pond in Centennial Park. No one has been convicted of that crime, a crime it seems everyone predicted. In the early 80s, we were not able to show her story for legal reasons. But tonight, you'll see Sallie Anne Huckstepp tell her story in her own words. But now we add the final chapter. Who killed Sallie Anne Huckstepp? Sallie Anne, what's your strongest memory of being a street girl on the cross?
Parading up and down Darlinghurst Road, probably.
It sounds very degrading. Did you see it like that?
Yes. Even more so when you run into someone you went to school with, or, you know, a friend of the family, or...
That happened?
Oh, yes. Too often.
What would you do?
At first I used to hide. But then after a while, I say hello and keep working. I became very hard. I mean, I hated myself. I hated being a junkie. I found myself, I knew I was really slipping, sort of going downhill very rapidly. And I hated my clients. I hated the customers.
So how did you act towards them?
I was very rough. I wasn't very nice at all. I mean, I wouldn't let them touch me. They'd been drinking. I wouldn't even let them breathe on me. I mean, if they didn't get dressed quick enough, I used to just take their clothes and put them out in the corridor and make them get dressed out there. I mean, I was really nasty with a girl.
Not much of a life for anyone, let alone someone so young. But not long afterwards, Sallie Anne brought another life into the world. Sasha Huckstepp was 9 when I first met her. Her father was in jail at the time, and her mother was still battling her addiction to hard drugs. Yet Sasha was a disarmingly level-headed kid. Sasha, thanks for talking with me.
Thanks.
I want to say one thing to you first, and it's very serious. If I ask you any questions that you don't want to answer, you just say to me, I don't want to answer that. And that'll be okay. Right? Okay, here we go. What do you think about people who break the law?
Well, I think that they're doing the wrong thing and, you know, well, I think they should go to jail as well, but...
How about seeing your dad in jail? What do you think about that?
I think he has done the wrong thing, but I still care for him and I still love him, even though he has done the wrong thing.
Say hello to Daddy for me, won't you?
Yeah.
Tell him that next week we'll bring him the sketchbooks.
Yeah, remember you have to give me your autograph.
Sasha often visits her father Brian in jail. It's not of her doing, but jails, drug addicts and criminals have been a constant part of her life.
Mummy, look what Daddy made for me. He made me this book. I like this one. He thinks I've got blue eyes.
You will?
Yeah. And he
Pleased
said,
to see you.
yeah, and also he said that he's only going to be in here for another year, so hurry up with the sketchbook.
Right.
Sallie Anne, tell me about Warren Lanfranchi.
I thought he was a very horny guy.
Is that all?
No, Warren was... You know, personally, I was very attracted to Warren. He was... He was almost schizophrenic. He had one persona that dealt with business matters, which came from his jail experiences, and he had another personality that was...
Your lover?
different. Yes.
So he must have played some role in getting you off heroin.
Yes, Warren was wonderful. And it was very easy. Come off heroin. Warren wanted me to get off it. I found it very easy to get off it.
Because you had a substitute?
Because I felt fulfilled.
I asked her if she thought Warren had any sense of morality when he bashed junkies.
Yes, he had a jail code of morality.
When a man pushes heroin and bashes people with baseball bats...
But no, hold on. Warren didn't... Probably Warren only ever hit anybody with a baseball bat once or twice. You see, much has been made of Warren going out with baseball bats. That's not true. Certainly he used a baseball bat as a threat. But Warren was pretty good with his fists. I mean, he didn't really need the baseball bat. The threat was usually enough. He gave them a lot of chances. Probably that a lot of other dealers wouldn't have. I wouldn't have been so tolerant.
Would you have been violent?
Possibly. Because it's the only thing that those people understand.
But you were one of them.
Yes, and you have to accept that those are the rules.
I think most people are sickened by violence, even if they're not associated with it at first hand. But you seem to have a tolerance for it. You really seem to accept it as being part of the scene.
Well, it is part of the scene. I mean, it is something that it's inevitable. When I first started working up here, I was very eager. I mean, I wanted to make money, make plenty of it. And then as I became a worse junkie, as my habit got worse, and I started supplementing my habit by shooting up barbiturates. I started getting later and later. I'd come in at 11, 12, then it was 1 or 2 in the morning, and I was working through to 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. People would be on their way to work, and I'd still be standing there.
Warren Lanfranchi was a small-time hood, a nobody. The man who shot him, Detective Sergeant Roger Rogerson, was a highly decorated frontline cop. The inquest into the shooting may have been a non-event, except for Sallie Anne. Sallie Anne became the overnight sensation who upstaged the star cop. The media lapped up every detail as she gave her version of what happened that day. It was a Saturday. Sallie Anne said she and Lanfranchi counted out $10,000 in their flat. They were both nervous. This was a dangerous plan. Lanfranchi knew Rogerson was after him. Sallie Anne said Warren was going to attempt to pay him off with the $10,000 when they met in Chippendale later that day. But Sallie Anne had a bad feeling.
Warren's last words to me as he walked out the door were, I said to him, "What time will you be home? Because I'm going to be worried about you." He said, "Well, Sal, if I'm not home by 6 o'clock, you know they've killed me."
Sallie Anne claimed in court that Lanfranchi did not carry a gun with him that day. But courage alone would not win on her day in court. After all, it was her word against Rogerson, his police colleagues, and Neddy Smith. Up until the Lanfranchi inquest, officers like John Laycock looked up to Roger Rogerson as a model cop. But that perception changed when the coroner brought down his findings. In the Lanfranchi coronial inquiry, the coroner found that Rogerson did indeed shoot Lanfranchi, but he failed to add in self-defence or in the line of duty.
That's correct.
What did that mean to you?
It meant there was questions being asked. There were some cracks emerging in his armour then.
Sallie Anne had suddenly made life difficult for Detective Sergeant Roger Rogerson. For the first time, the mud was sticking, and he spent years trying to shake it off. Rogerson's career never recovered. There were more investigations, more humiliations, and eventually, jail for bank fraud.
I'm innocent and I've been convicted on the perjured evidence of a criminal and a prostitute.
When the Lanfranchi inquest was over, Sallie Anne and Sasha were left to pick up the pieces of their turbulent lives once more.
I loved Warren. I felt more for Warren than I've ever felt for any human being in my life. I would have accepted anything that Warren wanted.
So how did you feel when Warren died?
I was sad. Mummy was sad as well, but I got over it.
The death of Warren Lanfranchi led Sallie Anne to reassess her life. It was time to make some changes. After all, she had a young daughter to think about. What sort of a mother are you?
Not a very good mother.
Not a good mother now?
Not ever a very good mother.
Why?
I'm not very maternal. I'm not into... Well, I'm just not I'm not the standard good mother. I do what I think is best, and poor Sasha has to follow along behind me. I mean, she's seen me as a junkie. She knows what a junkie is. I used to hit up in front of her. She's come to the realities of life very quickly.
Sasha, what do drugs mean to you?
They're bad.
Would you ever take drugs?
No.
What do you know about them?
That they're very bad for people.
What do they do to people?
They can kill somebody.
Sallie Anne had become a celebrity. And with that came the chance for a fresh start, a new life. She wrote articles for Australian Penthouse magazine. There was even talk of a book based on her many and varied experiences, some of them even stranger than fiction. Lady became a call girl, which means private work, I suppose a better class of client, and certainly a lot more money for a lot less work.
Oh, it is. But it's very hard work. I decided that fetishes were where all the money was. People who really want to indulge in something quite different usually have the money to pay for it. And it was interesting. It was quite fun, actually.
So that was an aspect of prostitution that you enjoyed?
Yes, I did. I loved it. I had 2 clients I used to dress up as babies. I used to put them in the bath and...
These were grown men?
Oh, yes, well grown, in their 40s. And I used to put them in the bath and put the rubber ducky in the bath with them and bath them and wash their hair in baby shampoo. I had special towels for them, you know, with lambs and things. And then I used to put nappies on them and have the formula ready and feed them bottles. It's very difficult trying to rock a 40-year-old man in your arms, but I sort of simulated something similar anyway, and they were great. They were quite funny.
What did they pay for that privilege?
$500 an hour.
This world of bizarre sexual fantasy was a safe haven for Sallie Anne. Her own life had become a dangerous game. 5 years after the shooting of her lover, she was still intent on revenge, and she'd learnt that the best way to get at her enemies was through the media. Today, Sallie Anne's daughter is in her late 20s, and she now has a child of her own. Sasha didn't want to be on camera this time around, but I can tell you, she's doing okay. I think a lot of kids of your age, Sasha, would see things on television, like criminal behaviour, drugs and prostitution. And I think most children of your age would think, well, it only happens on television, it's not really real.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, it's real. Well, it's real. Just that I think it's really bad how people do things like that. I'm sure I'd never do anything like that.
thankfully, she's learnt enough from my experiences to sort of veer off and go in the right direction, whichever that is.
Given your periods of irresponsibility over the years, does it surprise you that she appears such a well-balanced child?
Yes, it does, really.
Sallie Anne had walked on thin ice for many years. By the mid-80s, it seemed her enemies were starting to outnumber her friends. Sallie Anne had made a lot of claims since the Lanfranchi inquest, and the public was starting to take notice. But Sydney's underworld regarded her as little more than a pest. But late in 1985, something happened that would make them regard her as more than a pest. Sallie Anne became a police informant. She started working with 2 federal policemen. Now, she was a serious threat to the cosy relationship between corrupt New South Wales police and organised crime. 2 months later, she was dead. Do you think she was exposed by federal police officers?
I think Sallie Anne exposed herself. She became a high-profile target. I could probably name 4 or 5 or 6 people who would have the potential and the motivation to kill Sallie Anne.
Sallie Anne must have realised the danger she was getting herself into, perhaps even more than the 2 young federal policemen who appeared to be naive. For example, no attempt was made to conceal the fact that Sallie Anne was an informant. She was seen in their company in the Cross and at restaurants frequented by known criminals. And on one occasion, they actually brought her to Long Bay Jail in full view of the prisoners. They exposed her, and by early 1986, it was open season on Sallie Anne. Early in 1986, Sallie Anne moved into a flat with this woman, Gwen Beecroft. They quickly became friends.
We would talk about our past, and that's how she would tell me about her loved one, Warren Lanfranchi, someone that she really adored. She loved him very much. And so that's when she told me about this hate that she had for Nettie Smith and Roger Rogerson. She wanted the public to know how dangerous these people were. I think she was playing a game.
But the game was about to reach its fatal conclusion. Gwen Beecroft says a man called Warren rang Sallie Anne's flat on the night of the murder.
When the phone rang, she was actually in the shower, so she was in there having a shower, and I ran down the hallway to the phone. I looked up, it was 5 to 11, and I called out to her. So Warren's on the phone, and then she came out and half wet and towel around her head and robe on, and she answered the phone. She got off and she said, oh, hell, and started dressing out. She became hurried in a way that seemed as if she didn't want to go, but she was made to go. Someone had told her to go somewhere, but something was said on the phone that hurried her to get out of that flat fast. She was worried. And I kept asking, I said, are you going to be all right? Are you all right? And she just wouldn't tell me anymore. She pushed past me and she just looked at me and she said, I'll be back in 5 minutes. And off she went, and that was that.
It wasn't until the following afternoon that Gwen received the news. Sallie Anne was dead.
I just had this feeling that those 3 men had something to do with her death. I think towards the end it might have got a bit shaky for her, for sure.
Sallie Anne Huckstepp had survived her heroin addiction. She survived the perilous life of a streetwalker, and she had survived the shock and trauma of her lover being gunned down. She might have written her own ending for this story. There was a chance to start a new life, but someone else had a different ending in mind for Sallie Anne. It didn't take long to identify the victim. One of the first policemen to the scene knew this was Sallie Anne. She was well known to the police. It was February 1986, Centennial Park, Sydney. Her problems with heroin were well known, but this was clearly no drug overdose. Sallie Anne was lured to this spot the previous night by someone she knew. She was then strangled and drowned. Doesn't it seem a bit odd that if you're going to set up a murder, that you would do it so close to a public road?
Well, you've got to remember that Sallie Anne used to come here to buy her drugs off Warren Richards. This apparently was a place where she used to buy the drugs from Richards.
Warren Richards was known to police. He was a heroin dealer with connections to Nettie Smith and Sallie Anne. The original investigating team concentrated their efforts on only one prime suspect, Nettie Smith, and yet they had surprisingly few leads. Remember, Sallie Anne was a high-profile target. The murder was committed in City Parkland. Everyone was talking about it, but no one was coming forward.
A post-mortem is underway tonight after the death of a Sydney prostitute. The body of Sallie Anne Huckstepp was fished out of a pond at Centennial Park today.
Soon, Nettie Smith would be accused of Sallie Anne Huckstepp's murder. In 1992, Nettie Smith made sworn accusations against 97 police officers.
All Ned's allegations were just nothing more than bloody bullshit. Simple as that. But he didn't only turn on me, he turned on everybody.
Police began secretly recording Nettie Smith's conversations in jail. In 1998, he was taped bragging about killing 12 people. And within a year, Smith was charged with 7 more counts of murder. His most sensational confession was about the death of Sallie Anne Huckstepp. Smith was taped describing how he'd strangled her in Sydney's Centennial Park.
Smith is recorded boasting, "I hit her, punched her, choked her. There was terror in her eyes. I left her floating there."
The police collected 5 digital audio tapes full of these detailed, explicit statements by Nettie Smith. On one tape, Nettie Smith actually said the police had overlooked the one piece of evidence that he said could have incriminated him. He said Sallie Anne had scratched him in the struggle. There might be traces of his skin and blood under her fingernails. Sallie Anne's nail clippings had sat in a jar from the first autopsy for nearly 10 years. They were now sent to London for DNA testing, and indeed there were traces of someone else's DNA under the nails. It matched only 3% of the population, and that small minority included Nettie Smith. On the surface, it would have appeared at the time, here was the killer, Nettie Smith.
Prima facie, yes.
So you have legally taped claims by Nettie Smith to having killed Sallie Anne, describing the killing in graphic, callous detail. You have DNA taken from the victim's fingernails, which matches only 3% of the population, including Nettie Smith. and you have motive. But when the jury returned with their verdict, they found the accused not guilty of the murder of Sallie Anne Huckstepp. Why? Because, in their estimation, there was reasonable doubt.
What went wrong?
I don't think anything went wrong. It's a question of being able to put before a court the evidence we had. Obviously, evidence cannot be manufactured, it cannot be reinvented. We were stuck with what we had. We played by the rules, and the jury went the other way. That's just a fact of life. We have to live with that. That's just our system.
Attendant John Laycock ran Task Force Snowy, which reopened the Sallie Anne case years after she was murdered.
Sallie Anne dared to speak out. I think that was her fatal mistake.
Do you think that she knew what she was doing?
One of the problems with Sallie is that she was a raving drug addict, and I think drugs were the driving force behind her, so caution was thrown out the window.
It would be wrong to try and paint Sallie Anne as some sort of crusader for justice. She was no saint. Sallie Anne wanted revenge. There was a score to settle with the men she believed had conspired to murder the love of her life, Warren Lanfranchi. The New South Wales Police Service underwent the biggest clean-out in its history in the years following Sallie Anne's death. So, whatever her motives, Sallie Anne made a difference.